On July 17th, I posted a video calling for the search of a lost analog horror series called Station 72. Well, it turns out that the channel was not lost, and within a couple of hours, you guys found the series, which was pretty embarrassing because I guess I was just looking in the wrong places. The series, as it turns out, was actually called Local 72, which might have added to the confusion. Again, I was going off of a hazy memory from like 7 years ago, so don't blame me too much. But this series is actually pretty fascinating because it's not your everyday analog horror series. And I only say that because it came out so early in the analog horror timeline. See, what's really interesting about this series, Local 72, is that it's the second ever real analog horror series. Now, I know what you may be thinking, the analog horror genre doesn't really have a defined beginning. Nobody can really pinpoint when it began. And that's understandable, but there is a point when the analog horror community as we know it to be today actually began, and that was with Local 58. Local 58, made by Chris Straub, actually did coin the term analog horror, as you can see in the channel banner and on the channel trailer. And after Local 58 was created, a bunch of other series appeared, which basically began the origins of the analog horror genre on YouTube. There were some adjacent series that were going on at the same time as Local 58, such as ECVA and CH/SS, but they weren't really in the same community, so to speak. They didn't spawn off of Local 58. I would say the origin point, where you can trace back the history of analog horror, it pretty much all coalesces at Local 58. So that's why this series, Local 72, is actually so important, because it's essentially the second instance of analog horror as we know it today. In the timeline, this series came before Gemini Home Entertainment, even Analog Archives and Channel 7. It was truly the second channel ever made in the analog horror subgenre. Just for context, Local 58 began around 2015 or 2016 on Chris Straub's website, and this series, Local 72, was actually posted to YouTube before the Local 58 videos were even posted, reposted on YouTube. The first video was actually posted all the way back in July of 2017, which was before the Local 58 videos on YouTube were posted. So this is really the oldest instance of analog horror on YouTube, I'm pretty sure. And then the second video was posted in July of 2018, which would be right before Channel 7 was posted. So anyways, I thought it would be interesting to dive into this very bizarre and very early analog horror series and see what we can find, because I think it can tell us a lot about what analog horror would become. On the Local 72 channel, there's only two videos. A video titled Transmission % 20 Test and Traffic % 20 Update. Both videos are very short, with the first being only 26 seconds and the second being 1 minute and 4 seconds. Let's dive into the first video, Transmission % 20 Test, and see what we can find. The video starts off with a brief testing screen before transitioning into an ident screen for Local 72 NWCS TV. I'm not sure if this was a mistake or if it was intentional, but NWCS TV can't be a real call sign because in the US, TV call signs either start with a W or a K depending on which side of the Mississippi River they are located. Anyways, I will say that the little jingle that plays during this section is quite haunting, and I don't really know how to describe it. It's just kind of creepy. Take a listen. Anyways, moving on, the rest of the video just features a grainy video of a man walking near a riverbank, and that's it. It ends with the test screen again, and the video ends. There's really not much to go off of this, but it is a creepy piece of horror media, I will say. It's just very open-ended, and we are still left wondering what it all means. Moving on to Traffic % 20 Update, this one's a little longer, clocking in at 1 minute and 4 seconds. It starts off again with the same test screen as before, and then transitions into the Local 72 ident. However, this time the ident scales down and it reveals a text screen for a traffic update. However, what we see next is hardly what I would consider to be a traffic update, as the video just shows drone footage of a suburban sprawl with the text sprawl ticking across the screen at the bottom. A very creepy melody plays in the background where it pitch shifts up and down to the point where it just becomes uncomfortable. This whole sequence lasts about 50 seconds, until the end where we see the test screen once more. However, this time the test screen has a text box overlaid, which reads, "How much longer can we live like this?" And then the video ends. Once again, this video leaves us confused as to the true nature and purpose of the series. However, this video does give a little bit of a message, which is in the concept of the urban sprawl or suburban sprawl. The text, "How much longer can we live like this?" clearly is a nod to the inefficiency and unsustainable nature of urban sprawls, where suburban or urban housing just keeps spreading out further and further into the environment. But that's unfortunately all we have to go off of, as it seems that Local 72 was abandoned before a story could even form. However, I'm more so interested in how this series was perceived back when it came out, considering it was the second ever analog horror series after Local 58. And to my surprise, the comment section was very shockingly different from what you'd expect in an analog horror series. On the first video, the top comment was, "Local 58 has an alt?" The replies were, "There's also a channel called Channel 7. Isaac, what's weird is this channel uploaded this video before Local 58 uploaded their first one." And then somebody corrects that comment. Actually, Local 58 started way back before they started up the one they currently use. On the second video, there's even more similar comments. This user writes, "My guess is that the video is related to the world of Local 58. Everyone has to stay indoors and can't look at the moon. That's why it says, 'How much longer can we live like this?'" And another comment writes, "Well done, bravo on the audio effects and visual effects. I really look forward to seeing more from this channel. This gives me an alternative to the now disabled Local 58 channel on YouTube by Chainsaw Suit." So these comment sections give us a glimpse into what the analog horror community was like back in the very early days of analog horror. It seems that most people didn't really consider other series to be separate from Local 58. And that Local 58 was really the only series that could have existed. In fact, some people had even thought that Local 58 had ended, including myself, which is why I began Channel 7 in the first place. But regardless, if this channel had never uploaded anything, I don't think the analog horror community as we know it today would even exist. This was a pivotal stepping stone and a pivotal turning point in the history of analog horror. This is where analog horror went from just Local 58 to a full-blown subgenre. And most analog horror fans have probably never even heard of or seen this obscure channel. So yeah, that's Local 72, the second ever analog horror series on YouTube. I think this whole story is quite fascinating and can really tell us a lot about the history and origins of the analog horror subgenre. And yeah, that was kind of my fault for not realizing it sooner that this was still available on YouTube and was not in fact deleted. My bad, guys. So yeah, there was no big search for this lost analog horror. It was just there the whole time. So anyways, if you enjoyed this video, leave a comment down below telling me what series you guys want me to cover next. Any series that are, interesting or relevant to the analog horror story, I'd be willing to check out. I don't know if this is not going to be like an analog horror channel. I just wanted to cover some important aspects of this niche internet subgenre. Again, because I have so much experience with it. So thank you guys for watching. Hit that subscribe button if you have not already and ring the notification bell. And I will see you guys in the next video.